Hey guys, I feel like I abruptly ended my video yesterday. I had to take a phone call, so sorry about that. I do want to pick up where I left off yesterday, though, just kind of as a refresher course. And I know that looks like a hot mess, but you can see who was fighting on North Vietnam's side, and you can see who was fighting on South Vietnam's side. It basically was us when the French were defeated at the Battle of Bien Dien Phu. And of course, you do have the Viet Cong that are the enemy among the South Vietnamese who are really fighting for the North Vietnamese. Okay, so go ahead and take that in. Take it in. All right, so let's jump back here to our buddy JFK. So JFK, after Eisenhower, became the next president. And you got to remember, JFK was very anti communist. He did not want communism to spread. Think about the Bay of Pigs invasion in Cuba and the Cuban Missile Crisis when the USSR had their missiles too close to or pointed right at us as America. Thankfully, that ended well. But he is going to escalate the war a little bit because he is so anti communist. And so he sends what is known as personnel to Vietnam. We initially started with 2,000 personnel, and then he upped it to 15,000 personnel. So the war is escalating. Let's go to our buddy Diem. Now, Diem, if you remember, he was the leader of South Vietnam. And his people really didn't like him, and one group in particular did not care for him. It was the Buddhist followers that did not like him because this guy was taking away their rights, and he was telling them, hey, you can't fly your flag and you can't practice your religious rights here and traditions. You just can't. And so what these Buddhists did is they literally set themselves on fire in protest. There's a lot of iconic pictures that have come out of the Vietnam War, and this is one of them. So this is what the monks did in protest of this guy. Not only did the Buddhists not like him, but his own military advisors didn't like him, and they were going to actually create a coup and oust him. It was successful, and they end up executing him. So Diem is no more. 3 weeks after his execution, JFK was assassinated. And the next president after JFK is going to be Lyndon B. Johnson. I'll refer to him as LBJ from now on. But he's going to be the next president. And he, again, is also going to escalate the war because he feels like the Democrats have something to prove. It's almost like, we let China fall to communism. We let Korea fall to communism. Man, we got to prove it. And we're going to prove it here. That darn Truman doctrine, right? So this is a big deal. In the Gulf of Tonkin, you can see here it's a body of water. U.S. destroyers got fired on by North Vietnam. And so LBJ is going to fire back. The big point in this story is Congress passed something called, you can see it right here, the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, 1964. I'm going to read it to you. Look who it gave authorization to. It gave it to the president to take all necessary measures to repeal any armed attack against the forces of the United States and to prevent further aggression. It basically gave the president permission to do whatever he needed to do to stop aggression against the United States, whatever he wanted to do, without Congress approval. This is a big deal because you already got a guy in charge that wants to prove himself, and so that's what he's going to do. 1965, he sends in the first U.S. combat troops into Vietnam. So we're officially now fighting 10 years after the war had already started. War started in 55, and we send troops in 65. Boy, this Gulf of Tonkin resolution, look what it did. By the end of 1965, you've got 180,000 troops over there. By 66, that number has doubled. One Marine wrote right here in bold, it said, we saw ourselves as the champions of a cause that was destined to triumph. It said that when the U.S. entered Vietnam, we were there like we just couldn't even make a mistake. Our confidence was so high. We're destined to triumph. But unfortunately, we're fighting this enemy that was among us called the Viet Cong. And so you can see right here by this quote right here. The Viet Cong also frustrated American troops by blending in with the general population and then quickly vanishing. It was a sheer physical impossibility to keep the enemy from slipping away whenever he wished, explained one American general. You didn't know where they were, and they were really good at guerrilla warfare tactics. And here's an example of a booby trap. You literally step on it. You can see the nail or firing pin. Just go right in your foot. That bamboo. What? Wow. Painful. Here's one quote from these booby traps in reference to the booby traps. 3/4 of the way through the tangle, a trooper brushed against a 2-inch vine and a grenade slung at chest high went off, shattering the right side of his head and body. Nearby troopers took hold of the unconscious soldier and, half carrying, half dragging him, pulled him the rest of the way through the tangle. And that's what it was. Sometimes you would have those Viet Cong just waiting for a booby trap to go off, and then while the Americans are tending to their own people, just boom, ambush them. It was a brutal war. It was a brutal war. We talked earlier about napalm. When did the U.S. use napalm? Against what country? Hoping you're saying Japan right now, right? Flamethrowers, bombing of Tokyo with napalm bombs. And so, once again, the United States is going to use that here in Vietnam. And unfortunately and sadly, innocent civilians are going to get hit with it. And we got to remember that napalm burns at 212 degrees Fahrenheit. This is another extremely iconic, and when I say iconic, I mean famous, photo that came from Vietnam. And it was this girl right here running because she had been hit with some napalm. And you can just see the terror. The girl is still alive. Here she is right here. And there's other photos that show the burns on her back, but you can just see right there what that napalm did to her. Yeah, she's still alive. Woot woot. Crazy. United States also used Agent Orange, and that you can see these two images here. It burned off the foliage of the trees, burned the leaves, so we could see the enemy better. Can't hide, can't ambush us if we can see you. Haha. Unfortunately, Agent Orange has caused many birth defects, not only in the Vietnamese, but also in the American soldiers that came home that ended up having children. So very, very, I'm telling you, it was a brutal war in the tactics that were used. And this is all in the name of containing communism. Let me reiterate that, okay? And of course, we thought, you know what, we got to be winning this war a little bit. But the guerrilla warfare, the guerrillas had no intention of surrendering, and they were willing to accept huge losses to achieve their goals. Um, they were going to fight to the very end. They were going to fight big. So one thing that we needed to try to do was to deal with this. It's known as the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and it was North Vietnam sending supplies to the Viet Cong in the south, and they would use this jungle path called the Ho Chi Minh Trail. So what was happening is North Vietnam would receive weapons and other military items from the Soviet Union and China, and then they would use this trail. You can see the trail there, to get the Viet Cong what they needed to create havoc in South Vietnam. Very famous trail. All right. You can see right here, there are a lot of Americans, especially the young, that were protesting this war. And the young were the ones being sent over there. They didn't understand why we were going. Because you got to think, this has been going on for over 10 years, and they're like, this is supposed to be quick and decisive, and it's not. It's just escalating. When we first arrived in 65, you had 66% of the Americans approving of the war. It's just not bad. Not bad at all. One of our famous generals in Vietnam was General Westmoreland. He reported, the enemy's hopes are bankrupt and the end begins to come into view. And so this is what he's telling the American people. The end's got to be close. Okay? Yet, what we were seeing on the television was much different. And we just didn't understand it. Like, how can you say that when this is what we're watching on TV? And so they really started to lose faith in President Johnson. And so here you can see they were more protests. And it was just a very unpopular war at this point in the mid-60s. So more protests. African Americans did fight in the war. They constitute about 10% of the military. Unfortunately, if a person was African American, they were usually sent directly into combat. They were assigned to the combat units. And so they accounted for almost 20% of combat-related deaths. They weren't sitting behind a desk. Martin Luther King, got to pull him in here. He condemned the conflict. He said, I speak for the poor of America who are paying the double price of smashed hopes at home and death and corruption in Vietnam, because he's seen that the African American troops are being sent right into conflict. So he's very much against this war. And so what people started doing is the young people started avoiding the draft. They were called draft dodgers. And crazy number, 500,000 draftees refused to go. They were burning their draft cards. They wouldn't show up for their induction. They were leaving the country, going to Canada. And so from 65 to 68, officials prosecuted over 3,000 Americans who refused to serve. You can see right there, they're burning the draft cards. They're not going to go. What they ended up doing is they would have a lottery system. And this is their fair system of how you were drafted. Okay. So you can see that birth dates were in each one of these capsules. So in 1969, they had a drawing to give you a number, and every birthday would have a number assigned to it. And so they would pull out this number, right? Okay. And the numbers were going to be 1 through 366, because we got to include leap day. So let's say that my birthday was October 25th. So let's go to October. Take it all the way down to 25. And in 1969, I was assigned the number 176. The first draft happened in 1970. And what they would do is they would pull out these numbers until they got the amount of men that they wanted. So anyone in the first draft, if you were born between 1944 and 1950, and your number was 195 and below, you were drafted. There are a couple drafts. Nixon will end the draft in 1973. But you can go through there. You can go through this little link right here and figure out what your draft number would have been and see if you would have been drafted. If it was under 195, you would have been. You can watch a little video there on the Vietnam War draft. Not bad. And then our are 18-year-olds. So, like, seriously, you're going to send us off to war, but you're not going to let us vote? And so they fought for it. And in 1971, the 26th Amendment was ratified to the Constitution. And now 18-year-olds can vote. Good point, right? We're going to let you fight in the war. We probably should let you vote. There are two groups of people. They were called the Doves and the Hawks. If you were a Dove, you wanted the United States to leave Vietnam. A Hawk, you're going to stay and fight. One of the last big ones was, we're getting near the end of the war, and so one of the major battles was called the Tet Offensive. It was Vietnam's New Year, and the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese launched this massive attack. It's a surprise to us. So there are enemies where we've just been told by General Westmoreland, we're going to do all right. We're going to win it. We're going to come out of victory. They're telling us maybe that our enemy is weak, but yet they launch this massive attack at us. And they win. They even get all the way into our American embassy in Saigon. And we're sitting there at home going, what in tarnation? You told us that our enemy was on the verge of defeat, but yet they almost beat us. They didn't, but they almost beat us. And so the media had a very negative response to the war now. So the American people should be getting ready to accept, if they haven't already, the prospect that the whole Vietnam effort may be doomed. Walter Cronkite from the TV said, more certain than ever that the bloody experience in Vietnam is to end in a stalemate. I mean, we're just in shock at this point. Okay? It says, as casualties mounted in Vietnam, many Americans began to protest the war, the conflict over the war, increasing violence, and the apparent lack of progress in Vietnam led President Johnson to decide not to run again. Probably a really good move on his part, because he probably would not have been elected. At this time in history, what else is going on? Robert Kennedy is going to enter the race as a Democratic candidate. If he had lived, he probably would have won. 1968, Martin Luther King is assassinated. His assassinator, right here, James Earl Jones. Remember, Martin Luther King was assassinated in Memphis. 1968, a little bit later, Robert Kennedy is assassinated by Sirhan, an Arab nationalist. And our next president is then going to be Richard Nixon, who had already tried to run against JFK and lost. Okay, so a lot going on in this chapter. Make sure, that's all I wanted to get to today. I know it's kind of long, so thanks for sticking with me. And hey, remember, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to like and subscribe, because over the next few videos, I will be dropping some knowledge on you. All right, I really hope you guys are doing well. I always say it a lot, but I super miss you guys.